jump over to the presentation. So hopefully everyone can see the screen. So I think probably the best way to do this, to perhaps try and eliminate jumping back and forth. If you do have a question, just stop me, ask the question. You might have to say your name as well, just so everyone knows who it is, and then we can sort of roll in that particular manner. But we're going to obviously look at practice design. I'm going to sort of share my model, how I look at it. I'm going to subtract the creativity stuff that I always try, and that underpins my learning environments. And here's a sort of a pretty cool quote from Stephen Convoy around: give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime. So it's a pretty cool concept that I sort of look at when I try and build these sort of learning environments. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a little video. There's a few questions in. Forgive me if you've seen this, but let's see how it goes. Please shout out your answers as well as we go along.
The monkey business illusion.
Hopefully everyone can see this.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the
Yeah,
ball.
we can.
The correct answer.
Ooh. Obviously, yeah, apologies for that. So obviously it jumped up a little bit. Did everyone count 16 passes?
No, I stopped at 15.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's some that counted 16.
Ah, cool. So let's play it on a little bit.
16 passes.
The correct answer, obviously.
Did you?
Who spot the gorilla? Did anyone notice the gorilla?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the soft yeah. That's not confirmation. Eh?
You got to be honest, yeah, no cheating.
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color for the player on the black team leaving the game?
Anyone notice those?
No.
Cool.
There's one no. There's another no.
No.
No, there's a couple of no's coming out there, Warren. So we've got about on the comments. There's five no's.
Good. Let's see. Let's rewind. See if you can observe a few cool things here.
Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
Cool. So just a quick question. Obviously, there's some really cool stuff in that video as itself from a coaching perspective, because as coaches, we've got our own natural bias in terms of how we look at stuff. We are very fixated on that one particular thing. We want to look at a particular in game situation from the sideline. And of course in training, so we miss a lot of cool stuff in terms of that's actually going on around it. But most importantly, the question probably is, what's the reason you guys think I sort of started with this video? And hopefully this will link nicely into the whole thing. So if you just got a few, whatever your answer is, just shout it out or type it in the box, and hopefully Doc can can share some of those observations.
So something that for me that stood out, Warren, is that sometimes we're so fixed on something that we lose sight of other things because we've got a practice design, we plan a session, this is what I want from the session, but we don't identify other things in the other spaces. It's because we're so fixed on that. And I think that sometimes, for me, I think coming from a video analysis background where you look at performance indicators, you look at a definition where you code based on that definition, you're quite set, but you miss things around it.
Yeah, 100% agree with that one. Especially in my world, in the sevens world, where it's all about adaptation. You constantly have to adapt because things change and move. Buses don't turn up, pitches change. That pitch is not not in play. So adaptation is or adapting in the moment is massive, definitely. Any other observations?
Yeah, so here's a few comments. So Ms. Maria said tunnel vision at all times. We as coaches to not have tunnel vision. And then also Ms. Moore, don't have tunnel vision, otherwise you'll miss out on the bigger picture. Then Mr. Landman said it's a good icebreaker and also to stimulate and to look things broader than just the surface. Then there was a comment for thinking outside the box. So, and then John also said by looking at fixed positional things, you miss out on other variables. So that's most of the comments on the side.
Brilliant. Yeah, there's some really cool observations there. So the big one for me, and the way I always look at from practice design and learning environments and whatever, and someone just alluded to it, is a primer. More we can start with primers. Remember, every player we engage with or groups we engage with and whatever we try and do, the way we start things is how quick can we capture attention? Because we know attention, when there's meaningful attention towards something, that's where people are instantly engaged, especially when it's got an element of fun, an element of challenge, an element of problem solving. So when I look at stuff as a whole, in particular in terms of how I would start a meeting, how I would start an engagement, it's always think about what type of primer, how are you going to prime the group to almost sort of use thermostat sort of use. Just feel the room back there, something really capture their attention. When the attention is on money, that's where we've got people engaged in the process. When they engage in the process and they feel connected to that process, they will see a different level of learning. So all the coaches, especially the young coaches out there, primer. And yes, like all the other comments around that as well, it is really, you can go multiple ways with this particular video in terms of what we look at, how to notice the cool stuff, how to constantly observe what is around, what's going on around us, 360 point. So yeah, start whatever session you engage with. If you can start it with a primer, that's sort of. You got any questions on it, please.
Yes, Warren. So I've got a quick question on and maybe you're going to touch on it. So it's it's creativity in practice design, but how do you instill creativity as a coach within yourself in order to bring the think outside the box, use icebreakers to ask stimulating questions? What advice do you have for coaches to instill that?
Yeah, and I think perhaps the answer to your question might come into this slide a little bit.
Okay.
So maybe we hold it a little bit, and then hopefully I can answer your question after this slide.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's good.
Good. So, I'm just going to sort of go through this. We always go through. So I always find it fascinating when you talk to coaches and you talk to multiple people around certain stuff, whether it's environment, whether it's talent development, performance, youth, lead, male, budget, time, whatever it might be. They always refer to it depends. It depends on X, Y, Z. But what does it really depend on? What is the dependable stuff that's going to actually make your program better? So I talk about these sort of 3 Bs, and hopefully, Doc, this will answer your question as well around sort of the creativity. So the 3 Bs, I'll just go through them, and then we can have a little bit of conversation around them. So be curious. First and foremost, curiosity drives innovation. So the more curious we are about stuff, whether it is certain parts of your game model or the game, the tactical stuff, the skill development stuff, whatever it is, or just the strategic stuff, and the tactical stuff as well, whatever that level of curiosity is, we've got to dig deeper into that, because the more we get into that, the more curious we are, the more we put ourselves in positions where we can ultimately learn about something in a totally different way, and which links into nicely with being vulnerable. The more vulnerable we are, I think the more curious we'll be around stuff. So for instance, we know that creativity is a skill. Creativity is something we got to practice. We're going to practice it consistently. So curiosity pulls us that way. Vulnerability puts us in a position where we are comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's where, like, for instance, if you come up with a new game design, you have to go and practice it with your players. You might have to just stand in front of them and go, look, I'm trying something new here today. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I'm really curious about where it might take us. It might expand our sort of knowledge of that particular subject. But we have to just roll with it and see and explore and see where it ends. And then be purposeful. So these 3 Bs, I call them my Bs, they sort of form the foundation of my creativity, or they fuel my creative juices, where I would try stuff out. You fail, but you learn from it and you try and make it better. So hopefully this, so ultimately creativity is a skill. So the more you can put yourself in these type of positions and have purposeful meaning to what you try and achieve, I think that's the area where we're consistently developing the skill of creativity. Because every human being has got a level of creativity. We just got to uncover it, find it, and consistently make it better as we go along. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, so I grew up in a small town on the West Coast, so we used to play a lot of touch rugby and stuff, and that developed a sense of creativity because there was no coach. But what I sense is that as we went along and we got exposure to coaching, it seemed like we lost that creativity because we were forced into a system. And I think sometimes coaches, and I normally joke with coaches, especially older generation coaches, and I'll say, let the boys play. And because we scared that we lose control as coaches. And you spoke about be vulnerable, and sometimes coaches are scared to be vulnerable. And that's actually a good point. Let the boys play. Let them explore. Let them make mistakes during practice. Because if they're not going to try things during practice, they're never going to apply it during a game because they haven't been exposed to it. But now, give them exposure in practice. And in a game, they might end up using it, and it might be that X factor or that movement that will be a difference between a win and a lose at close to the end of a game. So thanks for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's nothing wrong with I mean, you can be creative within structure. It's just how purposeful you are around the preparation and the planning and presenting that, or articulate it in a certain way. So you still have a level of your players have to solve problems. They have to find solutions to certain ways. However, you still, whether it's systems or whatever it might be, you still put them into, you still very much use a creative thought process towards that to still create success. But yeah, the more vulnerable we are. But ultimately, for me, obviously, as you alluded there, from Gryfontein, yeah, we played many backyard games, and all those backyard games, it's coming in very handy for me now, from a coaching point of view as well. So, which I'm pretty grateful for. Is there any other further questions on this slide in particular as we move on?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How would you go about, so you want to be creative as a coach, but you also don't want to limit your players' creativity by giving them too many answers or too many things to do. So how would you kind of balance the amount of feedback you give them and like the creating an environment where they can actually be creative themselves?
Yeah, so no, that's a really good question. And ultimately for me, it's about and we'll dig a little deeper in terms of relationships and understanding people and really figure out whether it's a left brain, right brain thinker, how they think, how or what sort of stuff motivate them, or how they see their level of creativity as individuals. So for me, it's always about pushing the boundaries as far as I can. So it's a high level of challenge with a high level of support. At the same time, I would present certain stuff from a coach's point of view, but the environment is very much player-led. So they would be in, so for an example, a simple way might be how we review stuff. Sometimes I would be reviewing certain stuff, and I'll show you a few examples as we go through this. I would stand in front and perhaps review some stuff. The players will be up there reviewing in their own particular ways, and there's a lot of creativity comes through that. Whether I remember one of our last review sessions, which was a player-led one. They were in 4 different groups. One group reflected with a poem. One group reflected with like almost like a quiz, an online quiz. One group presented through a DJ with various songs that related to that situation, and the other one was just sort of your almost like a traditional way of reviewing, but just putting the players in that situation where they had to come up with their own way of presenting it back. You almost expand their level of creativity within in that particular way as well. So, and you sort of give and take in certain ways there as well. A lot of waffling there, but did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. It kind of just create an environment where they get to be creative themselves, kind of thing.
100%. And there's a really cool thing. Perhaps I can share it with Doc, where if you've got a coach-driven environment, it's always going to come from the coach. My bias is towards having a player-driven environment where it's player-centered, and I feel that's where you maximize the best performances on field, because ultimately the players are out there doing what they have to do. So there's no level of hierarchy within those environments, and you can just almost look, the team that's probably the best at it is the All Blacks, in terms of how they sort of have full ownership of their environment, but still sort of is driven by the players with a clear sort of vision and mission. Great question, by the way. Great question.
Yes. Warren, here's just a statement, Mr. Loubser. I think part of being vulnerable is having the ability for the players to lead themselves and have confidence in your guidance. So I think that summarizes your point of the hierarchy as well.
Yeah. And that's a great summary. You said it better than I could. But clarity breeds confidence. So the more you can, the clearer you are with the message, with the vision, mission, but most importantly, the how we're going to achieve, how we're going to win the World Cup, or whatever the outcome might be. As long as it's clear there, you'll breathe a lot of confidence. But no, that's a really good summary. Yeah, they're all. Any other observations, or are we good to move on?
I think so. Okay, no comments on this side, Warren. But I just got one observation to make regarding for you. Is there difference between player? So we speak about a culture is player-led or coach-led. Should that be player-led or coach-led? Because there's a difference between being player-centered and coach-led, and coach-centered and player-led. In your view, what is that? What is the difference, and how do you see that?
Yeah, so my environment, I'd like to think, especially coming into USA, it was very much when we started, it was cultural. It's very much coach driven, as we could see from watching NFL and basketball and all these coaches standing on the side with their big notepads and directing plays and stuff. And it was very much the same within the sevens environment when I started. But then we quickly realized that the limitation we're putting on their knowledge and understanding, because they expect the coach to say we're going to play X, Y, Z from we go like almost providing with a map. But as the game is very complex. There's too many and unstructured from that first phase, especially in sevens. From after first phase, it's very unstructured game as well. So we have to really push to get them to a level where they could be comfortable standing in front and presenting to the group. So and that was the distinctive difference for me coming from England sevens into the USA sevens. England sevens, where you had this group of rugby players that was obviously more experienced players, but we provided them with clear direction. They drove the message. They drove everything else within them. Still real clarity in terms of how we're going to play our principle-based framework and a real understanding for them. So basically, we set them up to be successful within that program, but driven through them. And but they ultimately made some really key decisions, which was really fascinating to observe in that time. And coming over the other way, where with USA in the beginning, it was very much they were looking at the coaches to go, what do we do here? And that sort of, for me, is the distinctive difference, where you could see where players are comfortable with taking the ownership on the pitch, versus where we're still looking around and go, am I doing the right thing here? Sort of looking over our shoulder, and ultimately and as a brilliant clip, and when I watched the and I reference them again, the All Black female team, I watched them. If you look at their halftime huddle, the coaches do not speak at the halftime huddle. They are having individual conversations. It's all driven by the players. That is a player-led environment, where probably the early days with USA sevens, it was very much the coach stand in front and telling everything about the game. That's sort of how I see. Ultimately, you want to get to a level where players can ultimately you want to be redundant. So for me, I want to be redundant as a coach. My goal through this Olympic journey with the USA was, by the time we hit out the last couple of tournaments into the Olympics, I can literally be redundant and just facilitate their conversations, as they've got such a good understanding of our why ultimately. That sort of couple of examples.
Okay, thanks. So Labib, so for those of you who know, Labib is the assistant coach of the Stormers. He just wants to comment on, or just make a comment, or speak about this player-driven culture being player-driven. Labib, all yours. You're on mute. Still mute.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Labib.
Okay. Morning, everybody, Warren included. Yeah, just a point in my experience which I picked up, and this is probably South African wise, from a player-led environment. What I found sometimes, because we have different cultures, it can be quite challenging. Example, I was in the under 19 setup many years ago, and I just come from overseas and tried some new things, etc. And then I told players, listen, go make a decision on say on a backline play, something on counter attack. And then so the player told me, "Nee, oom moet vir my sê wat om te doen." You know?
Yeah.
So our school environment also at that point didn't actually prepare players for this type of player-led environment. And then obviously other cultures as well. It's cultural in terms of players or youngsters are not meant to speak up to their elders. So I think from a coaching perspective, our creativity will be encouraged or challenged into how to draw those players in and to inculcate confidence in them to want to be take self responsibility, because if they make that decision, they'll take responsibility on the field, and I think that's what Warren is alluded to. The one challenge which I also found was like those halftime adults. It's all time dependent on how much pressure how much preparation you as a coach had at some point. So you want to strive to prepare your team in such a way that they can be self-sustainable halftime. Thanks.
Yeah, no, really, really great points there. And just for me, from experience as well, coming into USA, you're right, because it's such a linear environment. So what I did right in the beginning in that first phase was I challenged them incredibly hard. So we had this slogan, or our theme was to be the world's best problem solvers. So everything I threw at them was based around the cognitive challenge, and again, we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. But I had to really, so as you get, I had to really challenge them incredibly hard to have that mindset where we exploring here, we pushing the boundaries. The decision making might not always be on point, but we're listening from, and we had to articulate, and it was a challenge to get them to the point where we ultimately got them to. And it was a very similar, tell me where I need to go. So they'll ask me questions, I'll answer it with the question, and I didn't really understand. I almost felt like I didn't know anything about the game. That was some of the observations right in the beginning, but it was ultimately to get them to be a more creative, adaptable, resilient decision makers, ultimately at the end of the day, who's self-organized. And this is the type of players that I ultimately want to develop. However, I had to persist and constantly put them in these situations. And what I then did, I articulated the evidence and showed them the progress they are making, although training became more uncomfortable. And with uncomfortable, I mean, because they were so far out of their comfort zone, based on the number of decisions they have to make, the speed of the decisions they had to make. But I think it's the persisting to ultimately get them to that stage that was it was a fascinating journey. The other day I watched some of our sessions back from right in the beginning when I started versus to where we are just before the virus hit us, unfortunately, and it's vastly different. But no, that's really good observations. So just linking into this slide here, I've just alluded to it as well. So for me, it's ultimately how can I probably should go back here and ask this question quickly. Everyone, or better question here is probably, what does people see? The slide has obviously been on for a little bit now.
I see a chair. and there's a lot of space next to it. There's a lot of space around it. That's what I see.
Yeah, yeah,
And then on the chat, people see a chair.
yeah. That's good. And yeah,
and the reflection of the chair.
yeah, good observations there. And yes, so I always I've learned this from a really good friend that's so well known out there in South Africa as well. But we talk about this chair analogy, and we've made a lot of sort of remarks towards this now already. A lot of the times, and especially as I alluded to when I jumped in with the USA, they were very good at just seeing the chair. And as Doc just highlighted it, we can see around this chair there's a lot of cool white space, and we need to get our players to recognize the chair, but expand their understanding to really dig into these opportunities. Because if we think about the game as a whole, the game presents multiple opportunities, but how we design and how we build sessions and how we build our environment, is our environment tailored towards, and Labib just alluded to it as well, is our environment tailored to just observing and seeing the chair? I want to get my players to access this whole sort of brain process where they can identify everything that's going around us. Because a lot of the time because it's not obvious, we miss these opportunities around the chair in terms of this big white space that's out there. And as we know, in the game of rugby, there's always a lot of space. Now, and then probably back to the first question as well around the creativity levels. Now, we know sometimes some of our players perhaps get lost in the white spaces, and we perhaps need to just bring them back to have a real understanding of the chair, because the chair might have been the best possible space in that moment in time. So it's really building this a concept where people can almost jump in and out of how they see stuff and how they recognize and observe things that's happening consistently around the game. And ultimately, we want to get our players to be better at knowing when to pick the precise right moment for that particular moment in time. So for me, when I look at my players as a whole, I want to develop them as this complex problem solvers who's creative, adaptable, resilient decision making with the ability to be self-organized. And ultimately, this is beyond the game for me. This is not just a game of rugby. Now we're developing people, because people can take these skills in their everyday life and be very successful in their own particular ways on a daily basis. So that's just a really cool analogy when we sort of look at everything. Then, so sort of principles that I sort of live by around environmental stuff, or the environment, or the learning environment I wanna create. It's very much around, and perhaps we can just do this little exercise quickly. I talk about know your coffee, and I would suppose there's a lot of coffee drinkers in this group, people that love their coffee.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. I'd have thought so. So my question is always when I sit with coaches and I go, how many of us think about when we drink, say, this is a beautiful cappuccino, how many of us are actually thinking about where this coffee bean came from? How many of you guys has actually thought about how did that coffee get to this beautiful cappuccino? Anyone sat and thought about that?
Yeah, I have a coffee book at hand that I even read about, so quite interesting. I find it very interesting to go read up about these things.
Oh no, brilliant. Yeah, no, that's really insightful. So what I'm trying to say here is we've got to really understand that person. What is that person's story? Where did they start? What is the journey? How did they get in front of us when we coach them? How did they reach that point? I think the more we understand that story, because we know stories shape behavior, so the more we know that person, and that's where we can uncover the levels of motivation. What is the motivation that is it intrinsic or external? Is it money? Is it the dream of playing for the Springboks one day? What is it? What motivates that particular individual? What's the level of support that person needs? And I think the more we build this relationship and the more we understand people, the better we can challenge them, the better we can help them learn. But ultimately, that's where we can maximize their growth and development. So I always, when we think about, so next time when you jump in a session when we're all back on the grass, we got to really, because a lot of the time we go as coaches, and a lot of coaches would say this, this guy is not buying into what I'm doing. Yeah, this guy is always late. He's always this. He's always whatever it might be. We always find an excuse, and I'm curious about the behavior. What's causing that behavior? Why is that particular individual behaving in that particular way? Is it perhaps the way I'm asking a question that is instantly jumping on the defense? We got to really know and understand this sort of relationship we have with people, because too often we fall in a trap where we just want to coach rugby players. Ultimately, we know it is more than the game. It has to be beyond the game, because when we go in beyond the game, that's when we ultimately start making people better. So the exercise I always do, yeah, and perhaps the chap that sort of is really obsessed with his coffee, maybe he can quickly tell us his he just quickly summarize a coffee bean journey in your world. Perhaps a player that you've been exposed to. Where did it start? How did it get to? How did that cappuccino come onto your pitch?
Sure. So I had a player once that where I had to drop 2 players, and then this player, I found out about him, like he was very, very passionate about playing in my team, but I dropped him, and one of my players in the season got injured, and I had to pull him up again. And during this time, I realized inside of him, he felt he didn't deserve to be in the team, and he was really, really struggling off the pitch, and I didn't know about it. And then one of the other players told me that he cried after one of the matches, and then I dig deeper and told him he needs to be, I want him to be in this team. He's good enough to play in this team. So that kind of built actually was basically the roast of the coffee coming together, and me realizing it's way more than that. And after the season, his dad wrote me this massive letter and saying, I've influenced this kid at a level that no one else could have done. He almost quit playing hockey, which I'm a hockey coach. And that I thought like was quite cool, with finding out where this cappuccino comes from. So yeah.
Brilliant story, and that's the key thing. I think that for us as coaches, this is the game changer. The more we can build these relationships, the stronger the relationship is, the better, and that's when we can really understand. I mean, for me in professional environment, for instance, is you sometimes players don't even want to be professional rugby players, but they're there because they're good at it, and it's an income. So you got to really understand, some players are excited to play for their country. Others are just happy to be club players. And within the club, some of the players are just happy to be squad players. So you got to find their level, challenge them within their level, and consistently understand how you're gonna make that particular individual better.
Warren, I just have a question from
Yeah.
Says Annika. So you pose a question: what is the effective way to build a strong coach-player relationship, especially when an athlete is more personal and not outspoken? But there's a coach-driven culture question that Stefan also posed earlier, but I'll bring that in later.
Okay. Yeah, can you just repeat that question again, Doc, please?
What is an effective way to build a strong coach-player relationship, especially when the athlete is more personal and not outspoken?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I give you an example, and so one of the girls with USA Sevens, for instance, she's one of our best players. She's one of our most experienced players as well, within the Indian environment. She was the one that I really couldn't get through. Instead, a very big defense mechanism up, because she's been within the environment. There's been a high number of coaches, a turnover of coaches. So perhaps that had a part to play as well. But yeah, I find it really hard to get through to her and it was just her way of the way she is. But what I did in that situation is and again, linking back to the vulnerability, I asked her to look, let's just go for a coffee and have a conversation. That initially spiked a few things where she's already on the defensive in terms of, oh, why do you want to go for a coffee with me as a player? And I said, look, I just want to have a coffee and have a conversation, and we get to know each other a little bit better away from the field. So we went for the coffee ultimately, and I was just curious about how I can make her better. So my questions was, how do you want me to make you better? How do you want me to improve your level of learning? How can I help you? How can I support you? Because I'm really struggling here. I feel like I can't get through to you. So what can I do to make sure that I support you perhaps better? Because it feels like I'm not supporting you the way I should be supporting you. And her response was, she was a little bit freaked out by the questions, because she said no coach has ever asked her that type of questions. So effectively we build a really strong positive relationship, and we understood each other a little bit better. She's just an introvert and doesn't want to say much and just want to get on, do her thing, and was retiring at the end of the year, and just want to come and do the best she can do on a daily basis. And that was how she was seeing the world at that time, and I just sort of supported her through the process by consistently challenging in the best possible way to make her, or to give her confidence. So yeah, that's sort of an example of how I did it, and I think you'd be surprised if you just invite one of your players for informal coffee catch up and try and take stuff away from the actual game and talk about their families, their life story, their journey, and whatever cool stuff they are in. Try and dig into their worlds a little bit. Cool.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that, Warren. And then there's another question. So, when can you only get the results on and off the field if you know your players? There's plenty of coffee in the world that has different tastes and aromas, and like in the context of players and coaching, there everyone is different and they act differently.
Yeah, that leads us on perfectly to this next slide. Hopefully I can answer it here. So I stood at Starbucks and I looked at this picture and I went, this is my team. This is the sort of stuff we are daily facing. And as you can see here, this menu at Starbucks is very individual. Each own coffee, own price, own size, own shape, own number of whatever it might be is. So we have to individualize our environments. And what I mean by that is we have to give people the freedom to be themselves within our environment, their authentic self. But that authentic self has to ultimately make the team better. But we've got to allow them to express their own sort of levels of creativity, authenticity within that environment. Because the one thing we don't want to do, or we should never be doing, is having an environment where it's one gloves fits all. Because we know that that's not successful teams don't operate in no space. So for me, it's very much an individual environment relationship, understanding how to get the best out of people. And from the coach's perspective, if you can build sort of a matrix where you've got a clear understanding of how people think, how people perform in certain different pressure situations, how they would react to different type of scenario. If you've got your own sort of coaching matrix around that, you can support those particular people a little bit better. But I'm big on this because me as a person, I want to be myself, and I perform at the very best if I can be myself within in an environment. I've been in environments where you had to be a certain way, and that didn't suit me. So I was not comfortable because I couldn't perform at my optimal best in those particular environments. So yeah, individualize that environment, understand then what is their mental capabilities, what is the obviously from the rugby playing ability within that, how do they learn, how do they sort of the characteristic, is it the right person for that particular environment? Because we all know that talent have a sell by date. Talent don't last forever. You gotta consistently be working incredibly hard on a daily basis. Yeah, so ultimately we have to individualize our environments where people can be successful within that environment. Hopefully that answers that question, I hope.
I wouldn't mind a salted caramel mocha now.
I'm a tall, black and handsome, mate. Just a short version of it. But yeah, there we go. Just individualize your environments a little better, and we'll link into this with the practice design as well in terms of how we sort of coach individuals a little bit better within teams. And then sort of one that I always I use, I like to coach from the head down, what I call coach from the head down. So the more because I've heard this many times before where they go, the game of rugby is 80% above the shoulders. My question is always, so why are we not coaching in that 80%? Why are we spending on the 20% all the technical stuff from what I call from the feet? We have to make people better from a cognitive process, whether that is with the way you deliver, the way you challenge them, the way you support them, the different type of scenarios and situations you put them in. We've got to, I really try and mentally challenge my teams as much as I can based around the periodization. Obviously, you don't want to go too hard on them closer to competitions, because especially with female athletes, it's more around confidence. The more confident they are, the level of learning transfer might not be as high as I wanted wanted to be, but they're confident, they feel in a good space, and they can go and exploit the tactical plan in the best possible way. So the more we can get them in positions where they've got to problem solve, adapt, get into this level where they have to self-organize under pressure. So I'll tailor various stuff around this concept, because ultimately the mental skills forms the foundation of the top athletes in the world. They're all mentally resilient. So how do we build this level? Again, resilience is a skill. It's how we bounce back from situations. How do we put them in those scenarios so we can reflect and learn from it? And then ultimately, when we're out there on the grass in between the four lines, we can almost play with a great level of freedom. Yeah, so is there any questions on this slide in particular?
I just want to make a comment, and I know Chris is here as well. Sometimes people say that you need a psychologist to work from the head down, and I don't think that is true. Because coaches, you need to play that role as a sports psychologist. It's very useful to bring in a sports psychologist or mental coach, but sometimes if you instill that in your environment, it's easier for those players to accept, let's say, help from a sports psychologist from the outside, help from a mentor coach or a life coach. So if you create that environment where they can come and learn, or we're not just going to stimulate and improve them as a rugby player, but our focus is to improve them as a person and as a human being. And I think that then the battle is won easily. So if you create that environment where it's also important how you think about the game, how you think about life. It's not just this is what you need to do and this is how you're going to do it and you leave, but we also need to teach that skills that they can transfer and apply outside the sport they play.
Yeah, definitely. And we live in a world that requires a lot of resilience. So the more especially when we work with young players, young people on a daily basis, the more we can get them in positions where they're working on this resilience skill, how to be resilient on a daily basis, the better we set them up for the future. Because ultimately we want to coach people that would too often, we'll touch on it with the practice design, but too often we coach for this moment right now, and I think we got to coach for the future a little bit more, and that requires really working from the head down with people. And if you do have access to a mental skills coach, you got to dig in, you got to sort of make contact or just have conversations with them to really understand this concept a little better. But the most successful teams has got a good foundation around the mental skills in terms of how they get people better. So I would use this format in terms of the way I deliver and design and actually challenge people out there on the grass. So for instance, here's a quick example of how a team meeting would look like. Again, it's this would be an example. Yeah, we're just playing a little bit of noughts and crosses, X's and O's in the meeting room during the meeting to work on some. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, and that's just me piling on a little bit of extra pressure and giving penalties out. Yeah, so that's just a little bit of X's and O's, noughts and crosses, whatever you want to name it. But that's really to really put them in an uncomfortable position. And this would be during a team meeting, whether it's a reflective meeting on performance communication, on just putting people that doesn't quite like to be in the limelight, chuck them into the middle in a little bit, and it's just two teams playing against each other. So that would be an example sort of from how I push things from the head down, that's off the grass, for instance. And then the last one here, just around the environment as well, is be intentional. And we spoke about being purposeful already. Be intentional with your learning environments, and how do you create that environment where they can think faster than people around you. So, for instance, if you look at that game there, although it's a little game, but really intentional around how I challenge them cognitively, how we work with the communication, how specific, how sharp, concise that is, especially within the sevens worlds. It's everything is in split seconds, so you don't have time to waste. So you got to be really intentional around that concept, and intentional about how you prepare for these things as well. So if you want to create certain learning things, you got to be really intentional in terms of how you're going to mentally prepare yourself. What is the purpose of that particular activity you're going to do? Is it related to the team? Is it going to make the team better, or is it just for sake of doing it? And when we go into that space, we're not making people better. And ultimately, intentional around stuff that is fun, engaging, we capture attention and learning. So, for instance, here is a little video.
No, it's like, is it numbers or is it? No.
Guys, you got 15 seconds. So what I do here, this is maybe 2.5, 3 weeks before we went into the Sevens World Cup with England. And yeah, I do a game, what I call games within games. So we would do, let's say we're playing a constraint-based touch game, whatever it might be. And then we have this game with the cards alongside it. So we play here for let's say 40 seconds. And during that 40 seconds, I would just shout cards. They have to go. And the idea is the team that can get the cards in order in terms of suits, clubs, and hearts and diamonds, in order from aces at the bottom, kings at the top. That team win. So you just create another few cognitive stuff with the team. And again, this come in handy when we did jump into the World Cup and eventually won silver medal. Yeah, silver medal it was. Here's another example.
Ready, change, leave the card and change. Yeah, you can go.
Yeah, so this one here, this is whether, so I had the opportunity to help Germany out to try and qualify for the Olympics with their campaign. And here for me, this was just what I call a little speed dating. So obviously they're not full time, so these players don't quite know each other as well. I didn't know them as well, so I had to get to know my coffee really quickly. Yeah, so I just do a little game, a double. This is double cards, really cool game to get when you, especially during this time, get it, and so you can sort of introduce it into your training. And yeah, we're just finding out some cool stuff from each other. On these cards, you've got some certain images, so you can only facilitate the question around this image, for instance. So yeah, cool way to really get to know people away from the game. But you were never allowed to ask rugby questions, only around family and friends type of stuff.
Okay, we're ready. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, blue, 6, 7, red, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, this is one of my academy players at who's England 18th player as well. In the injured player, had to do individual skills with him. Still have to find a way to cognitively challenge him, and again being intentional in terms of how I keep his decision-making muscle work while he's not actively involved in games. And then it's just another.
And realizes the turtle just cannot keep up, and that
this is just a reflection session. So they have a little bit of competition here.
In the sky, sees this little bird, and then it follows the bird, seeing it as something that's going to lead it along the right path. And then finally, this golden apple at the end of the journey, it puts it around its neck, and it won the golden apple.
So yeah, it's just try. You have to really be intentional. Here we're doing a reflective session of I think it was a Friday session, just reflecting on some stuff during that week, and they had to build their own version of that week. But again, we use the double cards. You can only use those images to tell a story, because we know stories shape behavior. And I constantly try and use stories throughout this whole process to really engage and connect them with that. And as you can see, they're having fun, they're engaging, but most importantly, we're learning about how we can ultimately be better. Yeah, so those are just a few examples I thought I'd share there with you. I don't know, is there any questions on those stock? Here's another few.
We were passing to the target.
Oh, good boy.
You look down, like a carrot grass or fish.
And then we're communicating with each other. Okay, I got.
So this.
All right, who is the winners? I'm gonna tell you why I chose this team as the winner. Because instead of describing what the picture means, he said, tell them something you learn what that means. So something you learned in there, like what applies to the picture. This is us.
So this would be a kickoff session. So we're working on our kickoffs. I'm just facilitating questions, and we're using a deck of cards here.
So think about where their jumpers are, where we're gonna kick the ball to, what information are we giving? Go.
Yeah, so ultimately you can see they're having a lot of fun, but it's about learning. So I would try and intentionally find different ways to keep them engaged. And as you know, as Labib knows as well, we're in a full-time environment. You train twice a day, you train every day apart from a Wednesday. So and my challenge was always how do I keep every meeting unpredictable? And how do I still consistently capture attention so they can stay as sharp as they potentially can. Are there questions around that?
Yes, Warren, I just got a quick question, because most people on the group is quite inexperienced, including myself. Is there a site where you get these games from, or these activities? Can they contact you to get hold of these activities? Are you planning to make games like this available maybe on a website for people to download and pay and stuff? So what's your idea around the games?
Yeah, so they just contact me. I want to share as much as I can with people. I spend a lot of time looking at different sports. I spend a lot of time looking at how kids learn. And really around this play concept to engage people, and I come up with these ideas and I try them out. Some work, some don't work. But yeah, I just and again I just dig into how I grew up as a child. We did every single thing that we could possibly do in the community and in the street, whether it was cricket, Wimbledon, tennis, whatever it might have been, we played. So yeah, I just come up try and find the best way to create these learning stuff. And the other important thing is you got to connect yourself with people that perhaps feed your bias, but perhaps don't think the same way you do. And they'll pick up our ideas. But most importantly, it's about making it your own. You gotta make that idea your own way. So whatever you get here today, make it your own, turn it into something that works for your team. Because the worst thing you can do is copy and paste, and then there's no relevance to your team ultimately. But yeah, touch base with me if you want some of those games. Some of them, I had a guy message me yesterday on Instagram for a game in particular that I had to explain quite a fair bit, because some of them look very messy, but that's how I prefer it. But there's actually method to the madness. Cool. Is that make sense? Hello?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that gives people a good indication of our design, and maybe they can use some of your games as a reference point to design other games as well, and to make it, as you mentioned now, to make it their own, which is always useful.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Yeah, so just in the second bit, we're just gonna jump into. I'm just conscious of how much time have I still got, Doc?
You've got about 20 to 30 minutes left.
Cool. I'm just gonna go through this next bit now, where we just sort of look at the practice design stuff around how I look at building the tactical stuff for the team in particular. Yeah, and then this is a pretty cool quote. Is the keep good, or is it just because of the coach? So there's a really interesting one for us as coaches to consistently think about, because ultimately we want to be the people that sort of taking our teams to a new level. It ultimately comes down to what coach you want to be. And I'm just going to share this little video that I sat down with my 2-year-old the other day, and I thought, this is a pretty. How many of us recognize ourselves as this coach?
Most of us. I think sometimes in your journey you made those mistakes.
Yeah, definitely.
But you can never go wrong with Shaun the Sheep, hey? Shaun the Sheep is always a winner for a 2-year-old.
Yeah, no, definitely. I watched this, and I sort of, my takeaway here is sometimes we want to eliminate fun. We want to eliminate when our players are perhaps at their very best, because perhaps it doesn't fit our perception of things, or it doesn't perhaps fuel our bias. But we know when, as you can see, these guys were all about having loads of fun. So yeah, please, coaches, don't be that coach who intervene consistently and spoil their games. So question I've got is around everyone's obviously familiar with Sachin Tendulkar. Yeah. So how would we coach Sachin? You know, he was the best player in the world. If you had to do a session with you, how do you coach him? Anyone can jump in and answer this way. You got to design a quick session and make him even better. What do you do?
Okay, let's go, Devil.
Yeah. I'll probably think you probably have to make it fun. I mean, he's done all the boring training for many years. So, I mean, that's basically what he's been doing the whole time, just doing boring, same thing over and over and over. So to actually make it fun would actually probably be the best way to have a session with him.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, you got to find a way to engage him. He's the best in the world and has been the best for a long time. And I'll show you why this guy was the best. So when I watch these type of stuff, that's when I get really excited about coaching. when you look at stuff like this, we understand why this guy was the best in the world at the time, and probably still one of the best cricketers ever. So the question is, how do we develop sessions that encompasses what we've just seen there? How do we challenge people that needs to be challenged in the appropriate levels? How do we design stuff that perhaps looks a little bit unorthodox, but we know the intention and the purpose is clear behind, because we know when he's going to jump back on and face a Dale Steyn, he can play those type of stuff with ease, and it's about it being adaptable, unpredictable, because we know the game's unpredictable, and the moment we become predictable with the way we deliver and do stuff, that's when we lose, as Eddie Jones would say. So I always look at these sort of two concepts is around what's the game going to look like in the future? What's the evidence telling us? As we can see now, it's a lot of hybrid players, big, fast, strong. We know skills is going to go through the roof. Everyone is going to have to be ridiculously skillful as we go forward. So again, are we developing our players towards what this is telling us in relation to the type of people that's coming through now? So we're looking at our younger generations, who's after instant gratification. They've all got access to smartphones. They will challenge you incredibly hard if you can't give them the right evidence. So we constantly need to look at these type of stuff to consistently stay ahead of the game and consistently make our players better. What they're currently doing, but better in terms of where the game is sort of taking us. So these are two key things that I consistently try and reflect on. You don't always get it right because we can't predict the future, but there's some trends that suggest these stuff are sort of taking us in certain stuff. And it's really, for us as coaches, is understanding this new generation that's going to come through, because I strongly believe they are ultimately gonna make us better coaches, and if we don't evolve with them, they're gonna bypass us. Other coaches will definitely bypass us real quickly. So I'll just go. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'll just, again, please do stop me and ask questions at any time. So these are just my coaching principles. So from a practice design standpoint, I look at that game of the future, play of the future. These are my measurables on the grass and off the grass as well. So I'm a big fan around this play concept. I want things to be as playful as I can possibly be in terms of a representative of the game, but as I showed you within my meetings and how I design stuff, what that looks like. Talk about my 4 Ps, always a high level of positivity when I'm out there on the grass, purposeful, set them up with loads of problems, and the preparation, which I'll dig into a little bit more in a second. So those are my 4 Ps. Love and learn. So high level of support, high level of challenge. So the love is not the love we know, but it's a different level of love we have for our players and how we can make them better and how we can progress them. Everything has to be about learning. How adaptable am I? Am I prescriptive with my plan, or have I got the capabilities just to go in multiple ways but still be clear on my intention and get there? But it might not be I'm getting there in a straight line, because we know the creative process is a process that's all over. But as long as I'm clear and precise to what that intention is, and again, I talk about the attention, be curious. I want to notice as much as I possibly can. I always challenge myself to notice more than any other coach around me, because that way I can consistently make people better around me, because we know the balling play is very limited. In a 15s game, I think it's like 34, 35 or 33 minutes, something around that. So we know balling play very, very limited. So what's happening with all that other time? How are we coaching? How are we making people better? How are we noticing stuff that's away from the ball? So I'm very curious around that. And ultimately, my why is to inspire and develop people. That's ultimately why I coach. So these will be my principles, and I would highly recommend you design and develop your own coaching principles, because these are your measurables. This is how you get better. This is how you measure yourself consistently. Am I hitting this stuff? If not, why not? And constantly find ways to get myself better. I talk about the gap quite a fair bit, so I'll just go through this. So I talk about this gap. So you've got your plan. So you've planned your plan, whatever that plan looks like in terms of for the session, and then we've got the session, and then we've got this gap. So the key thing for us is to bridge this gap. So I talk about the individual coach preparation. So just to think a little bit, we tell our players quite often, you have to do extras. You have to do extras. You got to get better. We feed them with all this stuff. So my question is always, what are we doing as coaches? What are we doing? What's our extras? How do we get ourselves better? So in between the plan and the session, so I do a lot of rehearsal stuff. That might just be on the way to the session. That might just be in my car. That might be me just sitting here and preparing myself and running through stuff. So I know I'm gonna deliver this new game today. I'm going to introduce something. They might ask me this question. How am I going to respond? The game might go in that particular way. How am I gonna answer questions there? How am I gonna pull them back into that right moment? So I'm practicing all these scenarios that's consistently going through, and this is my reps. This is how I'm getting my reps. I'm pretending that I'm on the grass and going through stuff. So I give you a good example. I a few years ago, I took a young England team to Hong Kong Sevens, and obviously Hong Kong Sevens is like the big one in the sevens world to go and coach. And I knew that I'm going to have to be on the money at halftime, because there's going to be, say, 60,000 people in the stadium. It's going to be loud. It's going to be quite noisy. So I practiced the pool every game, every halftime. I practiced it in terms of how would I address this particular thing. How can I be succinct and sharp with my language, and really concise with what I do? Same thing with my meetings. I ran through them over and over and over, and when I jumped in there, bam, I could just smash it out, because I've been there, done it over and over and over. It's the same as a player prepare. We get ourselves in these positions to ultimate prepare, and that's how we breach the scapper. Where we could just go bam straight into the session, and we've rehearsed it, we've seen it, we're pretty flexible with what type of questions we're going to ask, who needs to be really challenged hard in the sessions, where do you need to pull someone back a little bit. But yeah, this is how I just so I don't miss the details, because as John Wooden says, it's the little things that make the big things happen. Yeah, I'm just conscious I'm going pretty quick, so is there any questions there?
Warren, you spoke about the gap, and we need to find your own gap as coaches, and use that time to reflect. Because when I coached SK Hormers, I had a lot of time to reflect, because I had about a 40-hour drive, so I could go to practice and rehearse and go through my stuff. But a coach's gap might be a 2-minute here and there, and how you use that time effectively. So it's not means it needs to be 10 minutes long. It needs to be in this format. It could be in any format.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it could just be split seconds. It could just be a 20-second conversation around, I'd ask this question in this particular way, bam, and then you move on to the next thing in terms of what you do. Yeah, but I really find that stuff, because I think sometimes we just go from the plan to the grass, and we don't really, and then what we do is we are searching, what I call searching questions. We search for buzzwords. So we would want to ask stuff around and then hope the players would go, scanning or communication. And then we facilitate what they tell us there, instead of we want to be able to ask really smart tactical questions that's going to make the team better ultimately. And yeah, so then when within the design, I look at the player, the task, the environment, constantly around these key things with the player sort of sitting right at the forefront of everything. So what does the players need? Is the task in context of the game, is it representative? What is the environmental stuff that we can benefit from around there within that particular session? And there's a lot of good research around this, so I would suggest we go and read up around some of these sort of constraint-led systems that people are out there using at the minute. But yeah, this is sort of the basis of my plan ultimately. Then I use what I call my 4D deliberate play model for my ultimate planning and preparation. So I talk about a free zone. So the free zone is where all the informal learning happens. And what I mean by that is that these are not zones of the pitches, by the way. This is just how I would design my practice design would look like. So the free zone might be where I just give players like 10 minutes to do whatever they need to do. Sometimes I would relay it back to the session intention and go, right, we're focusing on decision making. You've got 10 minutes to do whatever you need to do. If you need to come up with some stuff around decision making, and then I'll just stand back and see what they come up with. It's a pretty cool way to steal some ideas as well, because players are pretty sharp. They know a lot of stuff, especially senior players. They've been around the block a long time, so they've seen a lot of stuff. So yeah, you'd be surprised the amount of stuff you can take away and then go and make it your own skill zone. There, it's all about being in context of the game. Is it representative of the game? Is it going to make the players better? So let's say I'm working on a line break pass, then I would create something that simulates that's really representative of it, and I put various elements of pressure around that to get the best out of that, and I'll show some examples shortly. And then the drill zone. I think the drill zone is probably the zone where a lot of coaches are really good in terms of drill, static, unopposed sort of stuff. So I do a lot of, obviously with sevens and doing a lot of individual skill stuff. And what I would do here in this particular zone, I look at the individual process. I would individualize the process. So if you look at passing, for instance, Tom Mitchell, who plays for England, sevens, and Dan Bibby, they both play the same position, but they pass the ball totally differently. So Mitch is a very traditional passer. Dan Bibby is very unorthodox. So I can't coach them the same. I have to coach them completely different. I have to find a way to uncover their process, make him better at performing his process, tidy it up where we need to tidy it up. What I don't want to do, what I'm not a big fan of, is changing the way they do stuff, because these guys are pretty successful with what they do. You just find a way to make them better. Now, with younger players, who's novice players, they might not have that toolbox. So you got to facilitate them within that toolbox. So you got to put a few tools in there so they can explore and find the best tool that's going to give them the most success to get that pass from A to B. And within that area, I'll use a lot of gamification style stuff. So it might be 1v0. It might be someone against my game, for instance. Like for instance, with my kickers, I would do a game that I call King of Levels. You have 5 levels on the pitch: 5 meter, 4 meter, 3 meter, 2 meter, and 1 meter. You have to drop kick the ball from the 22 to the halfway within the channel. So if you kick 5 back to back, you can move on. If you go to the fourth, the next level, it is 4 meters, so it's 4 meter width. You kick 4, you can move on. However, if you miss one, you come back to 5. And that would be like gamification, building levels. So this is, although it's a drill, we're still working on the process, but actually it's a little game as well, because it's very competitive, and you get some really cool external feedback from that particular session. And then my game zone is very much around this play concept, very much around building the right levels of constraints, high level of decision making within it, purposeful games, really representative of the way we want to play the game ultimately. And that's what I sort of look at there. So when I do design, I look at these things and I'll put everything within that. And it's at the anchor there is it's always around the principles of play. So ultimately my principles of how I want to play the game. And it's underpinned by decision making ultimately. Is there a few questions on this model in per se? But ultimately, well, you need to remember, this is my model. This is how I like to look at things in particular.
Okay, just a comment from there's a question that does each session have all 4 zones?
Can you just repeat that, please, Doc?
Does each session have all 4 zones?
No, so it varies. Sometimes all 4 is in. Sometimes it's just skill and game. Sometimes it's we jump skill game drill. Sometimes it might just be free zone game. Now, so they don't always have all 4 in it. It just based on what is the best possible outcome for me for that particular session.
Yeah, and I think it's also linked to what is your aim and your purpose of your session. So that would determine in what zones you'll operate.
Yeah, definitely. Those are the stuff I look at there. And then this next bit here, this next bit is around how I then periodize the week or blocks or our tactical periodization, how I would look at stuff. So the red one here is the exploration. The yellowy one here is the alignment and refinement. So I call them these 3. So let's say Monday, Tuesday, we're going to be heavy around the exploration area, heavy around the exploration area. Then I know it's going to be high intensity, so coach involvement would be really low around that. But if I want to go refinement, so as we go nearer the competitions, it's all about perhaps going through our strategic stuff and refine everything, so there's 100% clear confidence in terms of what we want to get out of. But ultimately, most of the sessions will be around the exploration and alignment sort of area. So I'll build these themes across. This gives us a real good level of direction of how I ultimately then practice design. And then, as you can see there at the top, these are like our sort of challenges that I set the players, is to be the world's best problem solvers, be the world's best two-phase team, be the world's best transition team, and then you put them in situations where they can ultimately be successful in these 3 like KPIs, if you wanna call them that way, and everything will be tailored towards that ultimately. But it's consistently, it's about development and performance, and ultimately about how much we learn. And this just gives me a really good guidance in terms of where I could be at my very best with how I design ultimately. Has anyone got any sort of questions, or perhaps use a different type of format here?
So, Warren, you spoke about periodization earlier. What model do you use? Do you make use of tactical periodization or your traditional periodization?
Now we're looking at more at a sort of a tactical periodization where we could have the sort of the whole player involved. Yeah, that's what we look at from that perspective, especially around the S&C concept as well, is to have a holistic view of how we implement the game model within the S&C model to make sure that we don't do stuff in silo, but ultimately make the play better within the whole environment.
Yeah, because if you have the game, like you have the game approach, so that is part of your model. So it's in practice, you might move into, let's say, it's a high intensity session there. You might have a break for a game or activity. So that's incorporated. So with regards to planning, how do you guys plan a session? Is it the head coach plans and then everyone's give input, or is it, do we sit down? What is the aim of this session? How we incorporate instill creativity, how we create that learning environment, what the physical, the tactical, so how do you get to that end product?
Yeah, so it's very much so we've got the approach we use. So we've got, I would look after the attack, the head coach would look after defense mainly, and we would then break the week down in terms of what is the priority areas needed for that particular week. I would highlight these are the key things I need to get out of this week from an attack perspective. We've sort of moved away from having attack and defense sessions. We try and use like a whole process where we've got both constantly working on both. So that might be we will then sit and go, right, let's say I am leading the session, so this is how the session would look. Then we would prepare everything around, you are co-coaching this session. These are the key areas I would need you to look at within this let's say attack space session. This is the stuff I would look at. I would facilitate the conversations. You would speak through me or vice versa to make sure that conversations are succinct and the message is correct. And then we ultimately go, right, these are the key things. These are the two key things we want out of this session. Bam. And then we know the session is 45 minutes long. This is how we're gonna smash it in terms of what it actually then looks like.
Yeah. So how do you bring in? So you spoke about a player-led approach. Is players part of that planning process? Do they have input? Do they have say in some of the sessions? How do you involve them in that process?
Yeah, very much some involvement within, depending on where we are and what we want to do. So let's say, for instance, we want to introduce something new. There would probably be a little bit less player-led involvement. However, we could still with if you've got a senior squad or you've got a group of senior players, I have a group of co-coaches, which is players. They ultimately help me get better as a coach. So yeah, so they'll have some level of involvement there. We always not perhaps with the USA group with where we are in terms of the real in-depth tactical understanding, perhaps not as much as I had when I was with England Sevens, where you had this group of incredible senior players who's Olympic silver medals, who can perhaps have a little bit more of a driver in terms of the tactical side of the game, where on this side, yeah, they required a little bit more education. So their involvement was a more around the education piece, and then feeding up some of their feedback as well.
Yeah. Okay, Warren. So is there a part that you want to present still, or are you coming back to your slides?
Yeah, just this last bit. I'll just rattle through this last.
Okay, because then I'm going to ask a question that Stefan posed earlier, and I think that's going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So obviously, real clarity around the way you want to play the game. So ultimately, for me, it was we want to be fast. solve complex problems and be adaptable. So everything needed to be based around that. From that purpose, so all planning was related to this. Is it representative of how we want to play the game ultimately? Then I'll just go quickly through this one. So as you can see, this picture here, this picture is the Spanish Steps in Italy. There's a load of stuff
can't
going
see on. Warren, we can't see anything at the moment. You're not sharing with us.
Hold on. Is it back there now?
No, not yet. Yeah, there we go. So it's not. So you can make it bigger.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, this is just there's the last few slides here. Sorry. So this would be like the attack principle. So if you look at this picture, this is the Spanish Steps in Italy. You can obviously see a lot of stuff happening around in this picture, multiple people, and it's a lot of variables. But the one consistent thing is the Spanish Steps. They stay consistent. So if you look at our principles here, so it's always for the girls, it's attack, space, support, run to score. And it's ultimately about scoring tries. So the language could be consistently around this. So everything we designed based on that little graph that I showed you earlier, and the principles, it's always related to this concept. And the girls know when we talk about attack space, things won't change. There's little sub-principles within those areas to ultimately make our practice design even better. And these would be the challenges in-game challenges. Can we score 4 tries every game? Obviously, the world's best team from a two-phase perspective. And then we 80% attack decision making, which is ultimately unrealistic, but it drives towards something in particular for the girls. So yeah, from an attack point of view, this is ultimately the attack model, how we would attack, and then all the how stuff would be underneath all the principle stuff, the sub principles there within. And then sort of this last one here is then the reflection process is fail hard, learn faster, my process, because if we don't measure stuff, we ultimately not getting better. So I would. And the way I measure is obviously a lot of involvement with the players itself, a lot of hot feedback based on my performance as a coach. Co-coaches, as I alluded to earlier, is my group of the players. That's a group of co-coaches. So I've got a group of 4 or 5 girls who gives me regular feedback and based on how I'm delivering. And also my co-coaches as well. I use a GoPro quite often. It's probably one of the best coaching tools that I think it's out there. So if you do have a GoPro, stick it on, you'll get some pretty cool feedback. Outside eyes, I'll always bring people in from the outside to come and observe me, just give me some cool feedback that's not related to anything that I do on a daily basis. Is always good feedback you get from that. And ultimately the game is giving you some good feedback as a coach in terms of how you just prepare your team ultimately. And yeah, it's always about coaching in the future. I've got loads of clips and stuff that perhaps we can find I can find a way to just send you some of samples of how it looks in play. Because I know we're running out of little time, for instance.
Yeah, that would be great, Warren. So yeah, so I'm going to end off with this question, but then before we ask the question, Warren, thanks for your time. Thanks for always being open to share. And I've got some feedback from Labib now. He needed to run. He really enjoyed it. And it's great to see how he used the concept of play as a learning tool and to create that environment for players to grow. I think, and I used the example earlier of how you play Wimbledon Super Rugby when it's the World Cup cricket. You play, and there's not a lot of instruction, but you play, you learn, you make mistakes, And if you're upset, if it's your ball, you take your ball, and then you only come back tomorrow, and no one can play. So that's the idea of play, and I think we should let the children play, and we should think like a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old as coaches, and I think that's the best learning tool. And I speak on behalf of everyone to say thank you for your time, but I'm going to end off with a question, and I think it summarized the whole session. And Stefan said, am I correct in saying that moving from a coach-led environment into a player-led environment is about increasing the experience of the players, having a sort of trial and error process for the player to learn?
Yeah, that's a great summary. That is ultimately, I think, for all of us involved within that environment, is always about trial and error. So, and again, it links back to those 3 B's. The more, if we can put ourselves in that position where we're vulnerable and we are comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes, we will definitely, because what I mean by that is, if you're vulnerable enough to give your players the leeway where they can jump in and sort of take a little bit of control ultimately, because that's the big thing that coaches don't want to give up is control. So we want to give our players the opportunity to basically fail fast, or fail hard, learn faster. And the more they do that within practice and training, because those two are ultimately 2 different things, the more we do that, the better they ultimately going to be when they have to go out and go in competition. So yeah, I'm in big favor of having a more of a player-led environment, because ultimately you can see the progress, and I've seen the progress in the past in terms of how people are getting better. So yeah, I'd be a big advocate for pushing for that player-led environment. And that doesn't mean that coaches doesn't need to be involved. We have to provide that clear vision, and then that clarity of how we achieve that vision.
Yeah, I know. Warren, so here's a few comments. I'll just say thank you, and then some of the guys and girls say they can't wait to get back to the field, and then someone said they're very key to moving forward as a young coach. So, and here's a comment, really stirred my mind a bit, so which is good. I think for especially being in that space in lockdown, it's good that you guys are stimulated. So Warren, thanks again for your time. And so guys, Warren is quite open to interact and to communicate and collaborate on stuff. So make contact with him. Either I left his email through email, and then he's quite active on social media, and he's got some cool videos on Instagram going. So download, share. I think there's a lot of knowledge that we can take from that. So Warren, thanks for your time. Good luck with your own career. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but God will open doors for you, and you'll stay. Just by sharing, you'll open doors for you, and I think he'll take you to places that you never imagined. And then also, good luck with this 2-year-old. I can imagine it's quite difficult in lockdown with a 2-year-old. So I did hear them at the back there. So yeah, but stay safe as well, and good luck to you and your family.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, and hopefully there's some golden nuggets there for people. But please do touch base, and stay safe out there in South Africa, and keep up the great work. Thanks for having me, Doc.
Okay, thanks, Warren. Stay safe. Keep well.
Have a good day. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
All right.